Alrighty, it is noon, so we are recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Anne Patchett's Tom Lake. During this series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages each week, and we'll continue through November 3rd with a brief fall break on October 20th. I am Anna Traylor, the Special Projects Coordinator at Theodore Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Theodore Welty's friend and biographer, and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College for guiding these discussions. First, just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select Raise Hand. If you're on a tablet, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. And a lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance at that chat box every now and again. I also collect the weekly chat transcripts to share at the end of the series, but if you'd like a copy before the series is complete, just send an email to info@eudorweltyhouse.com. And with that, Suzanne, we'll actually begin today's discussion.
All right. I thought we would talk today. Again, I like our going through chapter by chapter, but I want us to also at the end to be thinking about things that we think themes, motifs that unite of these chapters, and we'll come to those. So let's start off with chapter 7, which begins with a family dinner and the daughters interrogating their father, and then moves to Laura's telling the girls about the past, and then talking to Hazel, the dog, about the past, and then talking to the reader about the past, and then we end up back in the present with Joe and Laura alone at home, their daughters all out of the house. So where do you want to start here? What in this chapter interests you? Where would you like to begin? Anyone want to start things? Let's start with Joe. The daughter's interrogating Joe about Duke. What do you have to say about that? Harriet.
Yeah, I was thinking about how this whole chapter is set up as a kind of a comparison of Duke and Joe. Joe owns this chapter. Um, we get the early conversation with the girls um, who feel amazed. That is, we're in this thing where they keep amazing themselves with what they are learning, and they learn that they realize that their father is a character in the story, and add him in, and we get a little bit sense of who he is by what he has to say. He's very calm. He's not excited about the story. He talks about them, about the Duke athleticism, but in the end, he says, "Good man," talking about Sebastian, "good men," so that we get his take on um, on on his wife's relationship with Duke, which is that he can put it all in perspective. But the other big comparison in this chapter is sex. It is the wonderful seductive quality of Duke. We can't go swimming now. We're busy now. We have plans, and we see them in their youthful attraction and delight in one another before we get to the empty house, and that sense that there's a sexual possibility of any parent's empty house, and then we get this conversation between them about the story that's being told. And I wondered about that because she says, "I'm not telling the good parts." And he says, "By which you mean sex." And then I think he says, "Really good sex." Um, and
He tries to be polite.
Well, I think it's she. No, she wants to be polite.
Yeah,
She said, I'm not fooling him, but still, I
yeah.
want to be polite. And then the capper, which is for so many years I have kissed him. For so many years I have not kissed another soul. There is a deep and abiding comfort in this. Joe is not Duke. Joe was never Duke, and I would never have wanted him to be. But my question about the conversation between them is, we really don't know what she's telling the girls and what she's not telling the girls.
Well,
Or maybe you have a different take on that. Uh,
I do. I have a different take on that. But let's go back to what Joe. I want to go back to what Joe says at first. That girls say, "Tell us about Duke," and what he says is he can stand on his hands. Why is that? Why is that what he? Why does Joe decide to tell him this? Do you think he can stand on his hands? And then when he goes to, they keep pushing him and they're talking, he deflects them to Sebastian. And when he says, good man, and then almost he corrects himself, good men. It's almost, oh, I left Duke out. I better not do that. Good men. So let's see, anyone else want to talk about why this little episode, the Duke standing doing handstands? Talk anyone? Yeah, Monica. Whoop, can't hear you, Monica.
Thank you for pointing out that detail. That's such a great detail of being asked about your wife's ex-boyfriend, and you say, well, he could stand on his hand. So that is a talent. It's not a very useful talent, um, although it is entertaining. And so we're getting this. So it's a great way of acknowledging, yes, he was a good man. He could stand on his hands. You know, it's a great kind of deflected. I think we see a lot of, I think you used the word deflecting. Um, we see Joe doing a lot of well, he won, right? He married her. He married Laura. He's the one who ended up with the family and the life with Laura. So obviously he can be generous, but noting that he
I seem to have lost you again, Monica.
runs a cherry orchard, and he's also very, if we're going to do this kind of comparative masculinity thing, I think being a farmer with a full family certainly is plenty, and he can be and he's not threatened at all by somebody who can, stand on their hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Duke is flamboyant. Joe recognizes it. Duke is a showman. Uh, but he's not he's really kind of hedging his bets, trying not to say too much to the girls, trying to deflect them, I think, with that. What does Laura tell the girls in this section? She hasn't told them anything about sex that we hear in this section, has she? Not now. She's going to in the next chapter. But she tells them about the first run through when they go to and then she tells Hazel the dog that I think maybe my career collapsed because I thought it was because I wasn't good, but I think maybe it was because I wasn't brave. But I'm glad I wasn't. That would have been a train wreck. And then uh, we have her talking to the reader, I think, where she talks about uh, Nelson with Duke and gets Duke's take on Nelson. Yeah, Cheryl.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to admit to you that I did not do the reading for this week, but it's because I've been rereading Our Town and I'm reading King Lear, and I've been fascinated. Yeah, I've been fascinated. Shakespeare's funny. He's funny.
Yeah, can we hold off on King Lear until we get to chapter 9?
Yeah, I'm just telling you why
Yeah.
I didn't do the reading. But I actually in the first 6 chapters, there's different annotations I've made about when I feel like Laura's been brave or when she's betrayed someone. And so I do think that she's a brave person. And I'm also thinking about and luck. So bravery, betrayal, and luck are themes that I've seen so far. That's it.
Thanks, Cheryl.
think I've also seen Joe Ellen. I'm not sure if
Okay.
you were just applauding or if you would like to add a comment for us, Joe Ellen.
Joellen, what did you have to say?
Um, my hand keeps waving and
Oh, I
disappearing.
see that, and I think I saw a hand
I
kind of
don't know how to control that,
yeah.
but I haven't gotten traction yet with the book, but I'm here. But I wanted to point out that Joe really grounds Duke. He's second best. He's not as good playing tennis as his brother Sebastian. Sebastian was the only one who could make Duke break a sweat. They're clearly extremely fond of each other. It mentions him as part of a family also, which is information that we're given. And Joe has just sneaked out of the question all the way and managed the whole room.
If we look at what the section where in this chapter where they Laura Ann ask Duke about Nelson, the director. So let's
Do we have a
talk
page
about,
number?
yeah, I'm going to find it for you just a second. If we shift to that and we leave Joe and Duke, and let's talk about Nelson and Laura and Duke. So on page 87, this is our esteemed director, Mr. Nelson, Duke said. And then going on in the chapter, we have we have the rehearsals. I give my lines with the script closed, and when we finish, Mr. Nelson smiled. Friends, let's breathe an enormous sigh of relief. We're going to have a play after all. So we get the director introduced here. What else? And we get Mrs. Gibbs introduced, who says, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Gibbs, who'd been especially good in her part, held on to me a minute more. She told me she'd been Emily once, probably before you were born, she says. And then we know that Laura is 25 in this section, the same age as Emily when she died. So we have that reference again to our town. So what do you think are these references to Tom Lake and the plays doing in here? Is Duke being set up in comparison to the director of the play as well as to Joe? Joellen, your hand is floating again.
I know, and it disappears in about 2 seconds. Yeah, I think it's really an important introduction to Nelson. I think you were looking for the bottom of page 87, top of page 88, where Duke has said, and this is our esteemed director, our fearless
Right.
leader. And he's the one who has no business being here. So he's flattering him. And then the guy playing Uncle Wallace chimes in,
yeah.
and he has all kinds of experience. He says, can't remember the last time I worked with a real director. Or there's always a director or someone claiming to be a director, even though they have no interest in your performance. But Nelson is a man of ideas. I thought I knew everything about the part, and he's played it about 80 times, but he's opened it up for me again. So we really get a huge grounding and
Yeah.
look at Nelson.
Okay, good. Yeah, Monica.
Thank you, Joellen, for bringing up Uncle Wallace because
Yeah, good.
he's a character. This description on page 87, Uncle Wallace put a rinse on his hair to keep it in the neighborhood of red, and his face had the slightly pulled back quality I'd come to accept in women when I was in California, but still found disconcerting in men. He pressed me to him a beat too long. Um, Later on in this, right towards the end of chapter 9, we get this line about Sebastian was a man, Duke was a boy, and Palace and I were girls. And throughout this, we have like men, boys, women, girls, and the different stages of life and how we figure out how we get from one to another. And so yeah, as we're getting this complicated Joe, Sebastian, Duke, Uncle Wallace, all of these different kinds of men slash boys at different stages in their lives. And we see Uncle Wallace trying to preserve youth in this very um, misguided way.
Yeah, he's found a part he can't age out of, supposedly. Yeah, supposedly. I like what Harriet said too. I want to go back to that too about Joe sort of beginning and ending this chapter. This is Joe's chapter here. So we get a real good sense of him. Let's go to chapter 8 and talk about it. So it begins with Nell revealing that Emily and Benny are going to get married. And then we have this Laura telling the story of her relationship with Duke to the girls. We meet Palace, and then we have a kind of concluding section there where she talks about memory. What about chapter 8? What stands out for you in chapter 8? Bill and Harriet and Monica.
Before I say anything about chapter 8, I just should have mentioned this, but Joe is the one that introduced Sebastian to us, and that took the girls off on a complete fancy there. And he also introduced the fact that Duke was their mother's ex-boyfriend, and that set the whole thing in motion. So
Yeah,
he has a way of just dropping these little bombs in, and then everything breaks loose and comes back and puts another one into the fire. So
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I love that, Bill. Yeah.
Uh, but I don't have anything right now on chapter 8. I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say about
All
it.
right, we'll go Harriet and Monica.
So this is for me, this is a chapter about mother-daughter agony. And she gets it really well. Nell spills the beans when she probably shouldn't have. And mom says, of course you should have. How else would we have known? Petulance in her voice. But she also goes on to say, I'm mad at Duke, who through no fault of his own and through only the fault of his essential Dukeness over which he had no control, tore the fabric that bound me to my daughter. And though it has been repaired expertly, repeatedly, this lumpy seam remains between us that keeps her from telling me she's getting married. That's a thread that continues in this chapter with a sense of the accidents that happen between mother and daughter that change the relationship. It's not Duke exactly that is responsible, but she's mad at Duke now because she's lost something in the relationship in when Emily was 14 that they haven't entirely repaired. I'll just say that much for now. Okay.
All right, Monica.
Well, two things. One thing that I did want to point out in chapter 8 is she makes reference to how quickly her relationship with Duke escalated, but she notes
Right.
that they were on summer stock hours, which in the outside world would have translated to a solid 6 months. And I love that, summer camp, summer stock, that kind of time outside of time, the kind of like Brigadoon experience that you get, especially in these kind of summer experiences, that
Yeah.
kind of echoes where they're at in the present day in the COVID life that they're living, which is another kind of time outside of time. Um, but something I found interesting at the beginning of chapter 9, then a common thread is this, you pointed out how this section we get the introduction of kind of sexuality and seduction,
Mhm.
um, but in the midst of domestic life of like, the parents alone in an empty house. And we see that when Nell makes reference to the fact that, she met Benny in the little house the night before, and they played Pictionary. And so we get this, I mean, little house, that's like a French reference to, a place that you would meet your mistress. And so I love this kind of the young women are learning about romantic domestic life through things like they meet in the little house to play Pictionary and, borrow.
I've lost you, Monica.
That was all. And
Oh,
that they meet in that little house to play Pictionary and for her to borrow Benny's copy of Moby Dick.
all right. Yeah. I meant to mention in chapter 8 when I think Laura is just speaking to the readers. She says, he may have been taking me back to a bed he'd already slept in, and I couldn't have cared less because it was my bed now. So she hasn't told her daughters that. The next chapter, she is going to talk to her daughters about this, but there is that kind of reaction. Yeah. Bill.
Yeah, just I haven't read ahead, so I
I'm
hope
trying not
that
to give things away. I hope I have.
yeah, well, no, not at all. But there's a mention in here about the shaggy and shaded wilderness of the cemetery was always Emily's favorite place on the farm. And something tells me that that is a foreshadow. And there's something of a dreaded feeling tells me that that might be.
I think
So,
we've got to watch for a lot of references to the cemetery, and here is where Nell and Laura go up to the cemetery, and it's full of daisies. It's beautiful. It's nature reborn, and it has a vantage, and it also is an allusion to our town and the cemetery
yes.
in our town, uh, and uh, and the family being all members all being buried there. Um, but it's where they go to kind of let Maisie tell Emily that she's in a little bit in trouble with her mother. Yeah. Harriet and then Joellen.
Well, I am thinking about how much we feel the presence of our town if we know it. That sense of the cemetery and the wedding, the stages of life,
Hmm.
not knowing what is happening while it's happening. Um, um, I'm also back to mother-daughter agony, and the conversation that goes on between Emily and her mom. It's not like we were just making plans behind your back. We're only having a conversation. I don't want to feel like I'm doing this wrong before I've ever done anything. That flair. And then her sister's comment, somebody didn't get enough sleep. And I'm thinking how this is family language. I just discovered this recently that OED added a word this year, which was familect, which is a word that refers to the language that families develop. Um, so there, somebody didn't get enough sleep, which is originally mom's words, and now when the daughters revoice it, it's a comic jab, and it's also about there being a family, and they're all playing this out together, um, uh, and um, uh, and um, and the discussion about not her Emily's not knowing how to do this, not knowing how to be a bride, um, and strategizing a COVID wedding that will keep her from having to perform that role as Emily does in our town.
Yeah. And wanting to protect her father, let me tell him. But the mother has not been protected. And then thinking, okay, there's a difference between father-daughter and mother-daughter
Well,
relationships.
and also we get mother's reaction that she's in the cabal. She's in the sister cabal
Yeah.
now. When they decide not to tell their father, and they are planning about how they need time before they do that. So there's a lot of very detailed family reaction.
And also the joining together and saying, when she says, I want to be married, I don't want to be a bride. And all three of the others agree with that. Yes, Emily's a genius. Yeah. Joe Ellen.
It just occurred to me we've had a birth, a calf's birth, a wedding conversation, and the cemetery here. And in this chapter, there's just a lot of slippage among ages. Monica mentioned at the end of chapter 9, pointing out who's a man, who's a boy, who's a girl, who's a woman. But on page 89, during the table read, it's it's about two-thirds of the way down the page. Emily says, it hadn't occurred to me until we started reading the funeral scene that I was now the age of Emily in the third act. And she talks about playing young, how young she looks, but then she thought of all those women dressed as girls who had showed up to audition in her high school. Then we have on page 101 the actual cemetery scene, which Bill has drawn our attention to it, where Emily was, if you turn the page, Emily is a little girl playing in the cemetery when Laura is pregnant with Emily. But this is a really crucial section, about two-thirds of the page down 101. We climbed the little hill to the cemetery, where to my surprise, the tall grass is tangled with flowers. And she's surprised. She said she was just there, and they had just been seeds thrown there. Maybe more than a month ago, but suddenly they're there. And I think, of course, of the jacket, the book cover, which is an 18th or 1890s painting, but it's all of green and daisies. And she has her daisy. I don't. Maybe we haven't heard about the daisy dress yet, have
Yeah,
we?
but
Yeah.
anyway,
Okay. I
well,
think
we
we
know
have.
that Duke is
Yeah.
putting his hand up her daisy dress
Oh,
skirt.
yes. Okay. Okay. But anyway, there's just lots of conversation about different ages and slipping around, and Laura being conscious of that.
Yeah, Monica.
Joellen's point is making me think about, we've talked about how this novel has very much got like literary allusions to our town,
Hmm.
and the cherry orchard. But it's also about not just the kind of literary illusions, but how we measure ourselves against literature. About how, she's like, oh, I'm now old enough to, I'm now aged out of this part, and this is a play
Hmm.
that people can repeat and age out of. And certainly there are novels and plays that I continue to read, and the older I get, they can, become completely different works. This is why I read Mrs. Dalloway Into the Lighthouse every couple of years. And I think Welty does that too, that, when the first time I read A Memory, I was kind of closer to the narrator of the story. And the older I get, the more I see other kinds of characters. So I think that this novel is also about literature and about how texts stay with us throughout our lives, and the texts change as we change.
I think that's right too. And I think it's not that she is trying to sort of just build another our town. It's that our town is a way of seeing the world, and that your way of seeing our town changes just as your way of seeing the world changes. And it's a reinterpretation. You're seeing the world through the perspective of the fiction or the play, but you're also changing your interpretation as you age. And
Right, like the last time I read Mrs. Dalloway, I realized I was her age, and that was
yeah,
very different from the first time I read it when I was 19.
yeah, yeah, I think that's right. What about the story of uh, that we get in the middle of this chapter, uh, when she turns to the past again? She's talking to the girls. The most amazing thing was how well I slept in a new state with a new job and a naked man I scarcely knew in my bed. So there's the first, I think, from Emily mention from, pardon me, Laura, the first mention of sex. And so Duke gets up and he's trying to get dressed, and he puts on her Disneyland T-shirt. Uh, and so what do you make of these scenes here with where she's talking to them, to the girls about this? Any comments about that? And then they meet Palace. She meets Palace, and Palace and is a revelation to her. And then she tells about the first rehearsal when Uncle Wallace doesn't show up and Lee is his stand-in. So understudy, Bill.
That particular place was. I had a question. Is she relating the story to her daughters at this point,
I
or
think so.
is she telling us about it?
I think she's talking to her daughters at this point, because it's the previous section says, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," they cry. Okay,
Yes, I know.
and,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
what
the
got me.
most of thinking was how well. And then it's as if she's going into the story, I think.
Can you bring us
Now,
the page number, Suzanne?
Anna, you might talk about your view. Anna's view is that this is a kind of strategic ambiguity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can you put us to on the page number, Suzanne?
Yeah, it's on page 106.
And I think Harriet might agree with me, so
Yeah.
I'll let her take it.
So we'll go Harriet, and then let's go Anna and then Harriet.
Anna, go ahead.
So I am a big fan of the word that Joellen used, slippage. I think that that is a keen observation of what the narrative experiment is happening here. I think that these slippings between past and present are strategically placed in order to remain ambiguous. We aren't meant to know what is she actually telling her children versus what is she telling us. I think we're meant to call that into question, and we aren't ever meant to actually hone down on an answer.
because we are meant to ask ourselves these questions of what would we reveal to our children. So that's how I feel.
Right. Harriet.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that that I find it very hard to know in this novel what she is telling herself, what she's telling the dog, and what she's telling the girls. And I think that that's on purpose. I think we are, paying attention to the ambiguity of this story and what she's discovering and how she's discovering. And she's learning, of course, all the things that she didn't know. But I also think that it is about the way in which we. I don't know. I'll stop there.
Okay. Should we look ahead and look at where King Lear comes into play here? Where is that on page?
I'll say one more thing. I don't know if
Go
you're
ahead.
about to say this, Harriet, but like in the way that we remember things, it's almost like, whenever we are telling a story in our mind's eye, don't we remember it one way and then what comes out of our mouth might be something different? Like if she's telling this thing, Laura, she might be seeing it in her her mind, but what in one way, but what comes out to her daughters is a different thing, and that's memory, and then how we convey memory.
I kind of hope this is being told to the daughters, because I think that Disneyland T-shirt is a really important detail. I mean, Duke is a Disneyland figure. He's not. This is not the real deal. And yeah. And she would undercut him by subtext rather than doing it outright at this point, I think.
The other thing I'm thinking is how much this is a special we're seeing this as a special conversation. Parents and children don't often have these conversations where you learn what you didn't know about your mother, and your mother learns from you things about that they observe about what happened, that's more accurate than your memory. And this is a COVID situation. This comes about because they're in this special situation of having been brought back together as a family. As she often says, she's having the pleasure of their being together while the rest of the world burns. And it's not a conversation that often happens, but it is happening here. And again, I'm thinking about how much we learn about family interaction.
Joellen and then Bill.
I'm glad that Anna really pushed that notion of ambiguity. I, of course, wasn't reading it, but I was skimming just a minute ago. And at the top of page 106, after quarter page down, Maisie says that's a yes. They've asked, did you love him? I was 24. That's a yes, Maisie says. That next paragraph, I would say she is definitely not saying to her daughters. In fact, in the center of it, it says, it's about her. Did she ever wonder whether her parents had him in love with other people, etc.? Maybe it's just that my girls are modern, or that Duke was famous, or that we were I think she's definitely not speaking to the girls there. Then I haven't found a place that really looks like she picks up talking to her daughters. In fact, at the bottom of that page, we have a scene. Where else would I be? It's in my room. Could be memory. I don't know. But then you're right, on page 108, we have an interruption mid from Nell, who raises her hand. What?
Mm-hmm.
You're objectifying her. Palace? What am I doing wrong now? But it's impossible, at least for me right now, to decide when she starts talking again.
Okay. Bill.
I was going to make that same point, but slightly differently. The narrative flows from the most amazing thing to Nell raises her hand.
Yeah.
So there's no break there at all, And so I just look at it as, yes, that's the story she was telling her kids.
That's the way I've looked at that part. And I've tried to be sensitive, because there are times when you really can't tell, it seems to me. And then there are other places where there are signposts, but I'm not sure that this is one of them, but I had thought it was, yeah.
But there's not an invitation into the most amazing thing was how well I slept in my new bed. at least that I can see right now.
Well, I think it's that above. They're calling mommy, mommy, mommy. I need.
Yes.
This is all that I have told them, and now I can feel them bearing down on me as if they are at once crawling into my lap, and then I have the
Oh
feeling that
yeah, but it goes from then, did you love him, to the most amazing thing was how well I slept with a naked man in my bed. So
yeah.
there's really a jump there. But anyway,
Okay, Cheryl.
Okay. One moment, please. So I'm thinking about how the three daughters are and they're isolated on the cherry orchard with their parents, and like they're contemplating what they're going to do with their lives, but then they're also contemplating what a romantic relationship should be, which is why as everything's being revealed to them, they're like, no, especially Emily, no, it wasn't supposed to be that way. And I've noticed that Nell oftentimes is the one who kind of lovingly steps up to defend her mother. And like when there was a disagreement and when the girls were younger and Nell turned around to her mother and whispered, "I love you." And she whispered it that way because it was meant just for her. And so Emily has a boyfriend. So she's connected to her romantic partner. Maisie also has a boyfriend, but they're separated because of COVID. And then Nell does not have one at all. So she's truly alone. And there's the dress that Laura first owned that was passed to each girl in turn. And Nell, the one who is actually single, and she is the youngest, but she's the one who now owns and is wearing the dress.
Okay, before we go on to the next chapter, let's look at the end of chapter 8, where they ask about George. What about George? And Laura says he's forgettable. Which means what? You can't remember his performance? Nell is concerned that this is further proof of my diminishment. To my children, I am unimaginably old. I mean, the kid who played George is gone, I say, but they don't understand what I'm talking about. Duke is as close as the cherries on the tree, as is Uncle Wallace, for reasons that are no doubt connected to how things ended. Lee I remember less as a person and more as a story, and George I do not remember at all. There is no explaining this simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. The painful things you were certain you'd never be able to let go, now you're not entirely sure when they happened, while the thrilling parts, the heart-stopping joys, splintered and scattered and became something else. Memories are then replaced by different joys and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things get knocked aside as well, until one morning you're picking cherries with your 3 grown daughters, and your husband goes by on the gator, and you are positive that this is all you've ever wanted in the world. Yeah, Monica.
As you're reading that, it really strikes me. This is a really unusual novel in that it's about a happy person.
Yeah.
And
you've got a book called This is a Story of a Happy Marriage, too.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me admire this that much more. And she does reflect, she's like, the world is on fire and I can't do anything other than like make masks and stuff. But this is really a fascinating story and I think what makes it unusual is that it's about a person who is content with their life.
Content with their life. It's about a person.
Right? A novel about
recounting her. It's a novel about memory, but then reflecting on the nature of memory as well. And
that maybe one of the things that you need in order to lead a content life is to have this kind of curated memory.
Yeah, I think, and we have that sense that memory is a living thing, as Eudora Welty would say. It changes. Your understanding of the past changes as we go through time. And what you remember, what you retain is not complete, but it's selective. And then sometimes memories will surprisingly arise when you don't expect them. So all of that about memory, I do love that. Yeah. Carol.
Can I just say that on the Eudora Welty House and Garden page, sometimes we comment so I just want people to know that you can go there and comment throughout the week, because Rachel Aaron Bryan just put in our chat, she co-signed on the Our Town being a happy story, and I'm wondering if it is. I'm not asking us to talk about that. I'm just saying that those extra thoughts we can still discuss during the week on the Welty Facebook page.
Good idea, and we certainly will discuss them before we're done talking about the novel. Let's go to chapter 9 before we run out of time. And one of my favorite scenes, I think, that we have to think about here is on page 118 and 119. So they start talking about Lear. So Laura and Duke are talking about Lear, and he says to her, "And you'd be his little Cordelia. Is that what you're thinking?" "I wouldn't mind," she says. "Put down the cigarette." "Why?" "Because you're dead. You're Cordelia, and you're dead, and I'm going to show you how Uncle Wallace plays Lear. I twisted the cigarette into the grass and died right there in his arms. Duke held my lifeless body against his chest, rocking me gently as his hand snaked up under my t-shirt. "Never, never, 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 never," he whispered in my hair, squeezing my left breast gently with every declaration. Truly, it was all we could do to make it back to the room. So, okay, so I think he's telling this to the girls. I'm not sure. We'll talk. And then when they're rehearsing, he's playing her father, and Nelson interrupts the scene. Nelson interrupted the scene. Nelson, who showed up for work in a collared shirt with the sleeves turned back and nice khaki pants, and while the rest of us wondered in the stage in cutoffs and fish t-shirts. "Peter, Laura," he said calmly, "if you could come up with a slightly more wholesome interpretation, it would be appreciated." This is when the father and daughter, when the daughter in our town says to her father, "Let's run away together," and they're interpreting this in a way that, let's say, we don't think Thornton Wilder intended, and so everyone is aware of it, and Nelson calls their attention to it. So these two back to back, Lear and Cordelia, Mr. Webb and Emily. What do you make of these scenes, of these encounters? What, John? Is that you over there?
Yes. And I'm sorry, I couldn't tell how to raise my hand on my
But I
screen.
saw your hand. That's good.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me see if I can get this. This is related to your question, I think. It's clear to me that Emily has not read, Emily, the daughter, has not read Our Town. And I say that because this is going back to page 104. She has this section where she begins with "Getting married is bullshit. If anyone wants to know, the whole institution is designed to drive women crazy." Wilder presents that the exact opposite in Our Town, where he talks about how the women are there to make sure that the knot is tied in a very public way. And one thing I think that the Patchett is telling us that there are some parts of Our Town that have changed over time. Some parts of the narrative, just because society has changed and the way that people view marriage is different.
It could also be, that the way people view those lines in Our Town has changed over time.
Yeah,
given our current social situations. Yeah.
And then there are other themes of Our Town that have not changed and that they're not going to change. And I think that is what we're being told on 118, or we're being reminded of it, not told it. With we have Duke portraying the end of Lear to Laura, and and the end of Lear is Cordelia is dead in Lear's lap, and Lear is saying never 5 times. I'm not going to say it 5 times.
Right.
And the end of our town is in the last play at the at the end of the play, George goes to the cemetery and he throws his body over Emily's gravesite. And in some versions of the play, there's a little bit more narrative by the stage manager, but I've seen it done where if that ends the play, where George is literally covering her gravesite, and my point is the grief is that one experiences with a loved one's death is not something that changes over life, and
Yeah, go ahead.
And so when I saw the allusion to Lear, which I was not familiar with, I mean, I've seen it before, but I hadn't remembered the never, 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 and that Cordelia died in his lap. To me, that passage was saying this is going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to die.
She'll never be back. So there's that whole emphasis upon mortality. But then we have Duke turning this into a moment of, a seduction. So as he's delivering Lear's lines, he is coming on to Laura. And then when he's playing her father, he's doing the same thing. Yeah, right. Harriet and then Joe Ellen.
Well, I have to say that I was stopped dead at the moment when Laura tells us that there's one erotic scene in the play, and it's when her father and daughter kiss, and she's to run away with her father. That's an interpretation I had not expected. But I do think that this is. I think that our town really ends in the cemetery. I mean, I think, I don't know whether I could call it a happy play, because it's the lives are the everyday, the quotidian lives, the everyday lives are satisfying. They're content with them. Although there are questions like, is it a good thing that George decides not to go to school because he's found Emily and that's real, and they're grounded now, and he's afraid that he'll lose her if he goes off and meets other people, and Emily has wanted to give speeches all over the world, and now they're staying in this location. So there's at least questions about if there's an ambiguity about the everyday life.
The smartest boy in the town leaves, but then he's killed in the war. Emily, the smartest girl, stays and has nothing.
Dies, but she also dies in childbirth.
She dies in childbirth.
And we know that, I mean, so I think that the play ends very much with a sense of the perspective of death, that no one's going to get away from, no one gets out of life. But this is resistance. This is turning death into flirtation and delight.
You would give me I think of it as being Duke's own perversity, falsehood, inability to
face
incestuous, focused upon himself, solipsism, as opposed to. So I didn't see it as.
We're starting to get all these foreshadowings about Duke's unhappy life. I wasn't going there yet because I think that that's ahead of us. Well, something, I don't know. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Joe Ellen, and then Monica, and then Cheryl.
I can't comment on anything related to our town right now, but we mentioned in the last chapter, we had issues of marriage, birth, and the cemetery. I think that Patchett is really pushing that here, that just the moment sexual ecstasy is
Love
being
and death.
depicted.
Yeah.
Yeah, just ecstasy.
Yeah.
And then just the pit of grief, kind of opposites and moments that you hope won't last forever. And I mean, Northrop Frye has said that, you know, you can't have, today we couldn't write a romance in the old ways. There are moments of romance and peaks of feeling, but that can't be maintained in any kind of realistic novel. But it's also been said that Western literature is just the two themes are sex and death, or love and death.
Love
And
and death in the American novel, if we go
yeah,
back to
and then we
Leslie
have the
Fee's
tangle here, as you've been saying, about the father-daughter thing. And I really do think that that bottom of 118, that I was your girl. I mean, you can take this Freudian if you want to, but, and Dirty Dancing comes into my mind, the relationship between the father and the daughter. And I only ever watched that movie because a young woman who worked at the pharmacy where I was going to pick up a film. I said, what should I see? And she said, Dirty Dancing. I've seen it 38 times.
Yeah.
And when I watched it, I realized that I think for young women her age, the poignant moment was when her father gives her license. I mean, that he recognizes that she's a sexual being and a woman. There's something in there, and there's the father-daughter kind of thing that gets really weirdly twisted in here with Emily and Mr. Webb, Laura and Duke.
Yeah. I think the sort of the subtext of the story is Duke's total self-absorption, using anything for himself. Yeah, Monica.
Well, and again, seeing how this novel is structured is just so wonderful. The bottom of 127, we get Duke going, "Where's my birthday girl?" So there's that weird Duke thing happening. But then Laura, uh, I walked out of the theater alone and thought about what I should do with my time. I never had time. And the next page, she like wanders inadvertently into cabaret. And so I think that this is another brilliant thing that's happening is that the theater is showing both our town and cabaret. And this is also, where she meets Palace and she says, I'd left Grover's Corners where we sat in a row of chairs in the cemetery staring ahead and arrived at the Kit Kat Club. So this is another way that like sex and death and life and domesticity are all kind of like literally juxtaposed in the fact that they're putting on these two different shows.
Yeah, I love that too. Cheryl.
I can't find it because I got distracted by the Dirty Dancing reference. So I didn't find the right place. But remember when Laura is first start to recollections about Duke, it's because the girls have watched a fictitious movie called The Popcorn King. And then there's a scene where he pretends he's disguised somehow. And she says something like, that's the hardest thing for me to believe is that people wouldn't recognize Duke for what he is or for who he is. When I find it, I'll put it on the Facebook page.
All right, good. Harriet.
Before we get into Duke's faults, I just wanted to put in a plug for Duke's magnetism, word that she uses to talk about the entire cast and why it is that, some people are magnetic in this way. And she says, he was, Duke had a truckload of it. If Jimmy George from high school knew how to look at a person, Duke knew how to make a person look at him. Which very much supports, but it's also in the quality of our delight in the story of these young people. It has its time and place.
And yeah, as she said, I was 24. Yeah. More age appropriate. Yeah. Okay, well, I want to look at one more passage in this chapter, and that's the last one on 131, where they're talking about Saint Sebastian. being a tennis player, a very good tennis player. And Maisie says to her, if Duke was famous, he didn't have a happy life. And Emily says, you don't know that. Emily says, picking. I might not have known much about Duke, but I knew his life wasn't happy. I put my arm around Nell's shoulder. As insane as this conversation is, I think you're making the right choice. And anyway, even if Sebastian didn't make the pros, he was still an excellent tennis player. He played McEnroe. And they say, did he win? No, he lost 6-2, 6-0. And Nell says, oh, Saint Sebastian, I can't bear it. What are you talking about? He was happy, I say. Sebastian never expected to win. He did, Nell says. Even if he never admitted it, he thought he might. He wanted to. Maybe she's right. Saint Sebastian was 29 when we met, and it was Duke who told me the story about McEnroe. At 17, Sebastian must have thought of himself as someone who could make it. The number of things I'd failed to grasp back then was as limitless as the stars in the night sky. Harriet?
I'd vote for that as the theme of the book as a whole. And beautifully said, what I didn't understand. And of course, I'm thinking about Art Challen in the sense that did they ever know when they were alive? Did they ever know how beautiful it was? Did they ever know what they were doing? And there's a moment in here where she says, none of us knew, but we were at the beginning of anything, but this was where the four of us started, talking about Sebastian and Pallas and Duke and herself. So looking back, she's learning things. Emily said they're in their delight, in their surprise, and they're surprising each other. Emily says, you can play tennis, but also when they go on to talk about a younger sister for Duke, she says he had a younger sister, and Mom says there wasn't a sister, but there was. So we're just sorting out what it is that we don't know when we think we do, and that sense of that Art Town sense of not understanding life as it's happening.
Yeah, a very strong connection there. And that sense that the past is something we come to understand differently over time and come to recognize differently over time. Yeah, Joe Ellen.
I just want to mention before we leave this chapter, Fool for Love. And I'm not going to be reading Fool for Love during this, but on page 121, she and Pallas are talking, I think. And she's saying, half the day I'm playing a little country girl in a town full of white people. The next day next half I'm playing a hooker in a German nightclub. But then in the next paragraph, after Emily has said, Laura has said, Fool for Love is going to be a lot more work. Pallas, a lot more fun. You and Duke in Fool for Love? That's a lucky piece of casting if I've ever heard one. They'll have to hose out the theater. And this is straight from a paragraph description online. It's a one-act play between former lovers who meet up in the Mojave Desert in a motel room. And it says they play into the themes of family history, obsession, and the cyclical nature of destructive relationships, a real love-hate relationship. And that reminded me of I think it's page 119 mid, where she's talking about rehearsals. And Laura says, at Tom Lake, rehearsals were our life. And they'll be rehearsing Fool for Love next.
I think this is another way that Laura works sex into what she's telling her daughters. I have to look back and see it, but I think this is in part of the narrative to her daughters where Pallas says that. Yeah. All right. I think we're out of time, are we? Yeah.
Yes, we have 1 minute left. Are there any final comments from anyone else? Or Suzanne, would you like to send us off?
I'll send us off. I want us to think about Pallas's role as an African American woman at Tom Lake, and what and that social context, and then playing the understudy for Emily, and in a kind of what will have to be a colorblind casting there. And then I also want to think about the cherry orchard and the setting of the cherry orchard and the family farm, and about the setting for COVID, and the issues in the personal lives of the characters as they play out, or as they are influenced, or as they are set in this social context. Can we think about the social context of it? So I'd like for us to talk about that. Joellen, you had one more thing?
I just wanted to make one remark that I think it was probably while I was reading this chapter that it dawned on me that I shouldn't be making the assumption that the cherry farm was at Tom Lake, near Tom Lake. And I knew very well by descriptions that it's somewhere else. But that just was kind of a whoa. And I'm not sure what to make of that.
No,
But
it's
that's
not
not
Tom Lake.
where the family lives, no.
And oh, it's not Tom Lake, but we'll find out. We're going to find out right where it is in relation to Tom Lake pretty soon.
And the title of the book.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you all.
Anna, you got us. You're sending us off. We're gone.
Yep, I was just going to say thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week at Monday at noon.